Were you aware that there are 12 top traits for highly profitable trucking companies? Well, me neither, but our next guest know all about it. They're going to share with us what they've observed through observing over 200 trucking companies in this space. With me now, I've got Chris Henry and David Roush back for a second edition in the hot seat to tell us what they're up to. Gentlemen, welcome to the hot seat.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you, Spencer. Great to be back.
All right. Well, let's just jump right in there, guys. Again, both you guys from KSM Transport Advisors. Love what you guys are doing over there. So let's just talk about this. How did you come to develop? We talked about getting 200 companies and observing that, but really, what was the process to kind of identify what these 12 top traits are?
Yeah, I think maybe we'll start with the population or who that group was comprised of. So it's basically a composite of the companies that I've worked with in the past, in my past benchmarking days, and now with KSM Transport Advisors, as well as David's multiple decades of trucking. I won't say how many decades, but multiple decades of trucking experience. And basically, it's our observations of the common traits that trucking companies with higher profitability share. And most of them overlap perfectly. Some of them don't have all, but they have the majority of these traits. And we're excited to share them.
Well, and I think that this will work well. We're going to be able to tease some of these out, and I think that we're going to be able to kind of direct our audience to kind of unpack all of these. The first one, I got to jump in. Number one, transparency and financial literacy as core values. So what does that mean, and why is that so critical to, why does that translate to a profitable business?
Transparency and financial literacy is the most common of the traits of high performing or high profit companies. And how we determined that was over the past 5 years, we've conducted a bunch of internal surveys, over 50 surveys on behalf of trucking companies. So these were internal surveys. And among 50 plus questions, one of the common questions amongst all of them was, out of every dollar of revenue generated by your company, how much is left over in the form of net income or profit? And almost without fail, the responses, and these companies could be anywhere from 50 trucks all the way up to over 2,000 trucks. The responses ranged from a penny to over 60 cents. And the ones that had the most accurate reading of what their actual operating ratio or operating profit was were also the ones that regularly disclose their results to their employees and their executive team, etc. So those companies also, if you're looking at a Venn diagram, it's a circle upon a circle upon a circle. These companies also were the ones that were the most profitable. So the way I relay this back is, if a person is to make a decision in a business, and every single employee makes a decision, some are more complex and more impactful, but everyone makes decisions. So if they don't have the necessary info, i.e., the actual operating profit or operating profit percentage of a company, they have no way to estimate the impact of that or a series of decisions on profitability. So they're effectively flying blind. So the ones that are more transparent also basically disclose the fact that their employees are able to contemplate and calculate what those decisions are on overall profitability. So it's also another way to identify high potential team members. So if you have team members that are interested in the profit of the business, that leads to additional entrepreneurial type skills within the business. So it's just a great trait that more companies should embrace overall.
So maybe let's pass that over to you, David. Let's just talk about maybe you can point towards an example where you saw the direct correlation of, a certain level of leadership having access to that information. Tell us about how that affected the P&L.
Sure. So going way back, my grandfather, who was a pioneer in the trucking industry, he had this saying: when it comes to secrets, one and one equals 11. meaning you can't tell anybody anything because it will get out. And in my family's trucking business, we generated a lot of information, a lot of metrics, and shared a lot of metrics with people, but we didn't really share the secret sauce. We didn't really give them away. We gave them a bunch of things, and we'll talk about that maybe going down the road as far as when we talk about metrics. But I also worked at a private equity company more recently, and private equity owned company back in the early 2000s, and they didn't share anything. They were like, this is our secret sauce. We own the secret sauce. We're not going to share the secret sauce. And eventually they went out of business. And I believe it was because primarily of a lack of transparency.
Mm-hmm.
In our consulting business, when I started this consulting business, transparency is one of our key values. And we share. I know it's not trucking, and trucking's way more complicated than professional services, but we share our financial and operating results on a monthly basis with our team, and we do a deep dive on a quarterly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe our results are positive, largely due to that, because people have ideas to help us get better. We can point out what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. So, and then you take that to the trucking companies that I've worked with, and there is a direct correlation. People that are open and honest get better results. People react to that. People want to help their company do better when their company is transparent with them.
So this is for either one of you. So what have you found that trucking companies are afraid of most about sharing financial information? Well, like what is the greatest fear out there?
Yeah, I think the number one fear, and they'll say it straight up, is people will be asking for raises. We found the opposite. People were blown away by how little profit there was left over after that dollar of revenue. So it
Right.
didn't have that effect. Once they started disclosing the financial results, people were more conscious of the decisions they were making on a day-to-day basis. So, one thing that we've observed, and obviously Spencer, you've observed this, is the growth of ESOP, employee stock-owned ownership companies, develop in trucking in particular. We've observed some of those. Those companies were already fairly transparent. You kind of have to be in that mode to transition to an ESOP, but they've become more transparent because they have to share on a regular basis the results. And as a byproduct, the ones that we're observing are growing in terms of operational efficiency and overall profitability in every market. So that's a kind of an anecdote that we've observed as well.
I think one thing is that we do a lot of, excuse me, you don't know, but we do a lot of work in acquisitions. We've done some work with you guys, Spencer, using our quality of freight process.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, we look at the company that is being acquired. We look at their freight network and analyze it, and look at what's good, what's bad, what can be fixed, what can't be fixed, strategies for integration, etc. And it's split about 50-50, 50%, and I'd say 70-30. 70% are fine. Give them the customer's name. Let's just do this, right? Let's lay it out there. It is what it is, because it is what it is, right? And about 30% of them of the engagements are anonymized, where there's the target company doesn't want the acquiring company to know exactly which customer. They already have the list of customers, right? I mean, they got that to begin with, but they don't want the acquiring company to know which customer is good, bad, ugly, whatever you want to call it. So I think there's definitely some of that that's baked in. I mean, people just don't want other people to know their business.
No, and I think that's fair. I really like what you said, Chris, about like the inverse in terms of the expectations. It's literally the opposite. Like it will be so much more helpful to understand like how thin the margins actually are, and how that can potentially enhance every team member's ability to be better stewards of the company's resources. And so I think that's such a great takeaway right there. So let me transition. to another one of the key traits for profitability: data sanity before data vanity. What does that mean, guys?
Yeah, so this is a big topic internally. This was something that developed over time based on observations as well as my own personal behavior. So for 7 years, I ran a carrier benchmarking platform. So it allowed companies, trucking companies of all sizes and types, to report in their financial and operational data, and then as a result get their comparisons in terms of performance measures versus others of similar ilk. At the start of that company, that the founding, our strategy was to keep the measurements to a very small handful. So we called them essential performance indicators. So ironically, over those 7 years, we grew from 19 measurements to over 500 essential performance indicators. So obviously, it lost its luster and its shine, and that was a business driven, but in hindsight, poor strategy. We basically decided what our clients want is what we're going to give them, but most of those measurements were not only non-essential, they were also based in a large part on data that wasn't actionable. So I think the key thing is for the top performing companies is they do influence and basically have discipline around what is important to track within their business and why. What are the key levers to improve on those measures at the company level, at the department level, at the driver level, at the non-driver level, in the maintenance level. So those are the key things that the top performing companies do. Um, the other thing too, to get people thinking about vanity versus sanity, is look at what you're tracking right now. So a common one would be revenue per truck per week or loads per truck per week. Well, that doesn't tell you whether it was profitable. Was it profitable revenue per truck per week? Was
Right.
it, so a simple way is to figure out a common methodology to calculate margin and express it as a per truck per week or whatever activity based measure you wish, but really focusing on the margin as opposed to the top line and the truck count, etc. So yeah.
No, I like that, and David, I want you to comment on this as well, and felt like you had a follow up, but I must try to sneak this in there. So one of the things that Chris said was about making sure that whatever you're tracking is actionable. I think this is really important for people to understand, because it's not just like, if it's only actionable by the owner or by a few key leaders, the probability of that actually changing is very low. So to me, that was a great distinction. I just want to point to that for our audience members, because like that is such a huge, very small and subtle like clarification, but that makes all the difference in terms of actually moving the needle on certain things. But I kind of wanted to get your feedback on that, David, in terms of how you're seeing that play out. Plus, whatever, I think you're about to chime in there about something else as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Spencer. So, I mean, you know, I agree with what Chris said. You need to have a strong strategy that is communicated, and then you need strong tactics to support that strategy so that the people that are making the things happen at the company know what levers to pull and what dials to turn to make things happen. Let me give you an example from the same company that I talked about that I worked at in the early mid 2000s. So this would be called vanity over data insanity, is what I would call this. So we had three CEOs in the span of the year and a half that I worked at the company. The second CEO thought, well, he knew more about trucking than anybody else on the planet, and he decided that the strategy was that the company was not going to haul a load under $2 a mile, and that the company was not going to deadhead a truck more than 100 miles to pick up a load of freight. So that was transmitted down to the people. And so what did they do? They made it happen. So instead of booking customer loads that were, let's say, $1.50 plus 60 cents in fuel surcharge, they'd book broker loads that were $2 all in. On the deadhead, what they would do is they would figured out how to put the deadhead after the load so that it didn't show up on the report as a deadhead. It just, the truck beamed itself from where it destined to the next origin, and the deadhead miles went down when you looked on a per load basis. But when you looked at it in total and looked at all the deadhead miles skyrocketed. So you have to be really careful, in these metrics that you use. You can't have 500 and however many Chris said that he had. You can't do that. But it comes down to a strong strategy with good tactics and communication to the people that can make it happen.
No, and I think this is really interesting because you pointed to something that I think is kind of a universal issue. I think well-intentioned, I'll put myself in this box where you're just well-intentioned CEOs. You have a vision about what you're trying to do. This is how we think we're going to get there. But even well-intentioned leaders, in the absence of the right data, can steer people in the wrong direction just because they have incomplete data. So where have you seen a company in your group that has successfully got feedback from the people actually doing the work about what we should be measuring and why?
Yeah, I think to work with us, that's a table stake. You have to be uh, engaged in taking action, and we hold you to account. And the leadership's bought in, so it's kind of a bad group to use as you know where it's not happened. But sometimes we have engagements where they fall off the rails, and typically it points to two things. One, something that you alluded to is having a leader humble enough to change their mind. So now that I have new information, and even despite my opinions and my experience in the past, based on the data that's in front of me and what my team is saying, I'm going to change my mind. So humble leadership is actually number 12. That's a sneak peek at number 12 in December. But on the on the flip side, not having the team bought in on the model itself is a key thing itself. So that's that's something that has to be a precursor to success for sure.
But you can be humble and say, hey, I was wrong here, but you have to communicate to the team what you're going to do different, right? You can't just say, hey, sorry. You have to have something else to tell them that you think should be implemented.
And normally that's bubbling up from a team member that has that good idea to begin with, or that pivot.
I mean, Spencer, one of the things when we go through our pitch deck, the number one thing that we say is required for success is the leadership is committed, and the number one thing that will make it fail every time is that the leadership is not committed, that they think it's a one and done, an easy button, etc. It's really a way of life. I mean, you have to continually adjust and make changes in your business. And if you just get stuck, you're going to be stuck.
That's a good word right there. So let me pivot over to one of the traits I'm most interested in, which is number 6, the courage to shrink. Now, that could mean a lot of things. Help our viewers understand what you're trying to communicate there.
So I'll start off on this one. So the number one vanity metric, going back to our previous trade, is truck count. As you know, Spencer, as David knows as well, that exists in trucking, and that has caused much of the turmoil that's happening right now. The freight flooded the market and attracted lots of external participants, but internal participants also contributed to that capacity growth. On the flip side, there's less of a resistance when the market turns to shrink. And the one of the key traits that we've observed, both from the companies that we've observed directly as well as public entities like Heartland Express, is when the market turns, have the courage to shrink truck count. And basically, what that means is establishing a minimum margin threshold. So this is the minimum amount of margin we're going to make with our assets. And if we can't achieve that minimum margin, then we're going to shrink our truck count. So Heartland is a great example of it. They've done it a number of times. They purchased a company called Interstate Distributor, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, and they immediately shrank the fleet right after, I think by about 20%. So they bought it to gain density, lane density, which is a key part of their network philosophy. But they determined that a lot of that freight wasn't profitable, or a good chunk of that freight wasn't profitable. So they went ahead and shrunk the fleet, got rid of trucks, right-sized the business to establish that minimum margin threshold. And I, everyone points to Heartland as a premier example of operating profit in trucking, but very few are willing to replicate their model. And it's difficult because that means every asset you shrink, you're out saying goodbye to a driver that could be important to you, in a year or two. But it's important that for a trucking company to survive long term and thrive, they need to set a minimum threshold of margin and profitability.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Spencer.
No, I was just going to ask, I can see how, there could be tension within leadership of an organization where you have one component of your leadership team that's been charged to grow and um, do whatever's required, and then, but there's also the side of the business operationally that their job is to create margin, right? Now, like, we're gonna figure out, and of course that they work hand in hand. So I'm just curious, like, how do you see some of the best of the best navigating that when you really and staying disciplined with these minimum margin thresholds?
And the leadership has to get the people that are charged with growing the business involved in the communication of why the business is being downsized. And it needs to be very strategic. It needs to be, we're not going to take away 10% of your freight. It needs to be, you need to have end up with a network that generates a higher margin percent, maybe not higher margin dollars, but higher margin percent once you're done with the downsizing. Uh, this is actually how I got into the consulting business. I didn't think it was, but I put out my shingle in 2006, 2007, and got some good clients, and things were going well. And then along comes the Great Recession, and trucking companies, like every other company in the country, were struggling. The OEMs and the financing people were taking collateral back, and companies had to figure out how many trucks. I mean, what do I do? I mean, I have to give back these trucks. What do I do? And so that's actually when I hooked up with Miller, KSM, because they had clients that were in that exact situation. And so we would go in and do work to optimize their network with the objective of maximizing their margin, and figure out how many trucks they could actually support in a reasonable network. Now, the kicker is that when you get rid of a lot of trucks, you got to get rid of overhead also, right? I mean, you can't support the same amount of overhead when you have fewer trucks. So then tough decisions need to be made, because you have to not employ high dollar people, right? Because they're like 5-to-1, 6-to-1 for a clerical person when it comes to the financial aspect. So it leads to some difficult decisions. And right now, we're engaged in several of these type of engagements to help companies understand, because they don't think the bottom is here yet, or if we've hit the bottom, they think it's going to be here for a long time. So they're trying to be proactive in what they're doing.
No, and I think that's why this conversation is so timely, because right now there's a lot of folks that are having honest discussions with themselves about who we are. Like where, like who are we as a business in terms of performance, in terms of our values. This is a climate where a lot of that is fleshed out. So like, um, I'm what advice would you give to these folks? Obviously, this is what you guys do, but for those that are trying to find whatever the next step for them is to build and grow a sustainable. I think that's the emphasis, a sustainable trucking company. Like, what advice are you giving to them?
I think it, not to use a colloquialism, but it's really drive for show, putt for dough. I mean, cash is sanity, margin is vanity. I mean, you need all those things, and so it's really to get your company put into a place where you're generating a reasonable gross margin, that you've made the tough decisions about how you're going to structure your overhead, and to chart a path to be profitable until the cycle changes, and be ready before the cycle changes to take advantage of the market. It's tough. I mean, there is no shake and bake recipe for it. But you got to be true, and you got to be real, and you got to really look at what you're doing.
And I go back to what is acceptable from a margin perspective. Um, Many of the top performing companies have incentive based compensation tied to overall company profitability. So those companies are first to act because they see, what's in it for me eroding over time, which, is the free market way. So they have visibility into it. But what has happened over, based on my observations, and I know David too, is as things have become robust, or things became robust up until about 8 to 12 months ago, in that 2 to 3 year window, we had companies relaxing their standards on everything from minimum driver standards to equipment because they couldn't get it. You know, so there's a ton of standards that were not enforced, in addition to the minimum margin uh, threshold. You didn't have to worry about that one, 2 years ago, but now you have to worry about that one. But you also have to worry about all the other minimums that you ignored. So I would start with there. What are our minimums that we accept? And let the policy dictate where you cut first if you have to cut. And the last point is the freight that you have to get rid of because it doesn't fit your network and your margin threshold, you may be able to broker it. So do an audit of what's brokerable and not, and that changes very rapidly. A lot of the shippers are now going to allowing more brokers, unfortunately, because of what's happened. But it, utilize that. So if you have a brokerage, um, move that freight over to the brokerage side if you can. Sell that freight, sell the stuff that doesn't fit within your network, and gain some additional creative margin.
Yeah, I think, Spencer, one thing just to add on to Chris, and I totally agree with what he says, of course, but there's also there's an issue in the industry right now because during the last cycle there was a lot of generational leadership change that occurred, and so you have a whole group of people who've never really they've led during the good times, but they haven't led during the bad times. So they're having to make decisions that they maybe aren't really trained, or don't have the complete picture on how to make those decisions. And I think that's a big challenge.
That's a great point. Mom and dad don't want to come back to help. They're done.
That's a big amen right there, gentlemen, on that. And then, hey, one thing I think that we I don't want to miss here is like, okay, yes, we're talking about the very immediate present, but let's talk about for a moment just the why. Like, what is the difference? What is the benefit for those that have leaned in and done the hard things? Like, what are they experiencing that the rest of the trucking world is not experiencing in that kind of upper echelon, most profitable companies? Because I think I really want to make clear, like, it's not just about making hard decisions. It's about being a business that performs and experiences something totally different. So can you give us a little glimpse of what that looks like and why somebody want to lean into some of these hard things?
Yes, summary wise, the difference in operating ratio is about 4% on average across all operating modes. So that's significant. That's almost double what the typical dry van carrier is generating in terms of profitability in a given year. So that additional amount, or double the amount of profitability compared to your peers, can generate a lot of good things. So, number one, based on that culture that led to the additional profit, it allows you to forecast in the future, plan in the future without stress. One of the key traits that I'm trying to break down into a trait is a certain level of calm with these high performing companies. They don't do anything based on gut. You're not going to get a decision on them tomorrow. They're going to take the time to quantify, qualitate, and they're going to talk amongst each other. They're going to have respectful debate, but you never see these companies get frazzled. At least, in the conversations I've been around them. I know it's always shinier on the outside than it is on the inside, but that is one thing that I've observed is these companies with higher amounts of profit, they have the ability to sit and wait instead of having to react to the market and the whims of the industry.
And one reason they have the ability to sit and wait is they build up their balance sheets, and they've tended their balance sheets, not just their P&Ls. And so they have the dry powder to wait through the cycle. They have the dry powder to make strategic acquisitions if they're in that mode. So they're just better prepared, and being, having a strong balance sheet, that calms anybody down, right? It helps you survive the ups and downs of life. So I think that's definitely keen off of what Chris said. A manifestation of that.
Well, gentlemen, this is some excellent insights right here. Where can our audience find the remaining of the traits that you guys have carefully crafted here? And then how can you also help them in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. To learn more about the trades, just go to ksmta.com, scroll the bottom, and sign up for our monthly Freight Math newsletter. So we'll be sharing June's trait, which is the number 6 trait, courage to shrink in detail, at the end of this month. We'll also be presenting next week at the ATA's National Accounting and Finance Council. I'll be presenting to their group on next Wednesday. And same way to get a hold of us for the newsletter. You can go to our website and reach out to us with any question you may have about your business and how we can possibly help you out. But our primary focus is helping companies with network-based profitability analysis, which we call Freight Math, and helping determine which customers, lanes, loads make sense for them, and perhaps ones that don't make so much sense for them.
Well, thank you guys so much for that. Of course, I appreciate what you guys do so much in terms of, the larger connection to the M&A world is just the work that you're doing is helping folks build companies that are more valuable. And obviously that's I think something that everybody's interested in at some point if they decide to make a change. And so we thank you for being here. That's going to do it for us in the hot seat. We'll see you next time.